So I've started to do some exploration recently of AI tools and trying to see, one, just how they work, what they're like. I mean, frankly, everyone wants to explore, right? But I've also been trying to figure out where and how they could fit in or might help or shouldn't be helping with my work. So today I wanted to talk a little bit about working with ChatGPT and some of my experiences, because I'll be honest, it's kind of blown my mind in some respects. But as I've worked with it a little bit more, I've kind of started to really circle around this sort of trifecta of amazing, terrifying, and stupid all at once when I think about AI tools. If you've used ChatGPT or some equivalent, Bing Search has some of these capabilities. They're showing up in a lot of different areas. You probably have some exposure to this. If you've used something like Dall-E or Stable Diffusion, which are image generation, you start to get a sense of how to think about really what isn't coming, but what is here today. Generative AI, content generation produced based on simple prompts, it's here today. Now you can choose to use it, you can choose not to, but for this video, I wanted to give a little bit of my insights using the tools, talk through where and how you might be able to use them and some of the pitfalls that you should be thinking of, and provide a little bit of context. If you're curious about them, they're in the news, you may have heard about them in a lot of different ways. This is a great way to kind of get a sense of what they can do. And so with that, we can start to dive in here. Now I'm going to switch over so you can see I've got ChatGPT up on my computer, and I'm going to show a little bit of some of the things that you can or can't do. Now, this is just at chat.openai.com. You can go, this is just a free account, so this isn't any premium or pro version. They do have a pro version because I'll be honest, sometimes you go and you try and make use of the tool set and you can't because it's under too much load. So something to bear in mind. They do have a nice little view here in the front explaining a little bit of how to think about what ChatGPT can do. Some examples of questions you might ask, some capabilities, and some limitations that you will run into. And they do a pretty good job right off the bat of talking about how you might be able to make use of it, what some of the things it can do, and where some caveats or gaps. So before we dive in, there's a few things that I've discovered as I've been working with it and exploring the tool. I think ChatGPT, in its current state at least, this is GPT-3, there's now a GPT-4, so a more advanced version that does a better job of being able to do both text and image kind of conversation. So you might be able to paste in a picture, for instance, into a chat and ask it about it. But for ChatGPT-3, it's not perfect. It's not going to, immediately take over people's jobs, right? But it can do a lot in a short period of time. I'm also going to have some content later on talking about Microsoft has a new Copilot function that's coming for Office 365, and that also has some pretty nuts sort of capabilities. But a few things stick out when I think about this. One, it's great for both kind of first or rough draft concepts, helping to get core information out that that you want to talk about, and kind of, for lack of a better description, kind of just getting a very robust first draft in place that then you can tweak and refine. So that's one thing. If you're thinking about generating content, blog contents, things like that, it really is a great first draft. If you know what you want to speak to, it can help get pen to paper quickly and easily in a way that you can then sort of springboard from. So that's something that's great. Another area where it's really helpful, and this is frankly very impressive, coding and code review, code analysis. It does a lot of stuff in that space, which I was actually very surprised by. I'll also note research and education. If you want to know about a subject, historically, I would personally, right, go jump on Google or DuckDuckGo or whatever search engine of choice you might have, and I would put in, how does this work? Or how do I do X, right? And you type in those details, and then you go and look through all the things, right? ChatGPT is a different way of doing that, and I'll get into that in a little bit more detail. Two other areas, it's helpful for reviewing content that you may already have, right? So if you want it to take a look at content you have, it's kind of like a souped up sort of grammar or spelling editor. And it can help with shifting tone and creating framings that fit with what you're trying to do. So let's dive into it a little bit. The interface is super simple. Everything you do is just typing into this. So just as an example of some of the things that you can do, very easy. Let's say you want to write a blog post about email marketing. Well, it's as simple as write a 500-word blog post about email marketing. Put it in there, and it's going to spit out its best attempt at doing that. Now, you can see it writing on the fly. You can see it starting to generate all this information. And let me zoom in here a little bit, so this will be a little bit easier to read, but it's going to immediately create a structured bit of content. Now, this is a draft. You got to take a look at it, you got to read through it, and then you want to personalize it. But hey, this is a pretty robust first draft of content. You can also articulate what you want to do a little bit more explicitly to help define what it's going to generate. So you could say, make it funny, right? And it's now going to regenerate this content. Now, whether or not you think it's actually funny, what it comes up with, that's another question, right? But you can have it change tones and styles very quickly. So you can see here, like, bam, your email is rejected, like a bad prom date or a bad joke, right? So it can do a lot with a very, very limited set of prompts. So that's, one quick example of content generation, and you can adjust it. So you could say, make it half as long. It's going to re-spit it out. It's going to get to some details, right? And this is another important piece about ChatGPT. One of the things that it does, right, is it maintains the context of the conversation that you have with it over a long period of time. Over on the left, I have a number of different sort of discussions that I've had with it. And that's one of the things that's really powerful, is it does retain the context, so you can ask questions to it without having to restate all the prior information, right? You can kind of continue to prompt it as you explore a discussion or an issue. And one area where that's actually been very, very helpful for me is I actually used it for some script production and some script testing that I really liked. So for instance, if I was going to create a new chat, and I might say, write a PowerShell script to create a new Azure AD user. And it's going to create a script right on the fly, right? It does a couple of different things. One, it puts commenting into this. So if you're doing technical work, it actually does try and create some context beyond just the code itself. Two, now this is probably too big of a script, but it'll add some additional language here, right, to explain, some important considerations. If you see a bit of information or things that you wanted to better understand, you can talk to it, right? So you can say, this is a bad example, but what is, right? Oops, been on my Windows machine for too long. And you'll see it's going to add extra details. So you can ask it questions on what it's generating for you in a way that's really helpful. Another thing that it can do is you might say, write a simple output script that says, hello world, or hello world, right? It's going to generate that, but it can also change that to Python. And boom, right off the bat, it's going to immediately adjust the script, change language on the fly. So that's actually pretty impressive. And this is another one where you can say, I'm running these things, I'm doing it, and I'm getting these errors. And it will help you troubleshoot an issue and work through it. So that's something that is somewhat shocking, but also very impressive. And as I was working with this, and I've used it for a few different things, I've used it to help review drafts, I've used it to help create some first drafts that I've then worked and modified, and I've used it with some technical testing and tools. The analogy that I've come up with is it's sort of like, imagine you are working on a project, an issue, and you're in office hours if you were in college or high school, and you're sitting right there next to, a PhD student, but it's not a PhD student for, a particular subject. It can be on a huge range of subjects. So you can go and dive into and explore different subjects and concepts. So one thing that I had wanted to better understand, it might be, I'm trying to think of a good example. So one good example, all right, let's say there's a subject I wanted to dive into, could be, what are good open source graphic design tools? And it's going to immediately spit out some detail and some context around it. So in terms of doing initial research, it's a great kind of starting point. It's faster, frankly, than Googling stuff on your own. Having this contextually aware dialogue can really accelerate your ability to dive into a subject, explore it, and to ask the questions that you are encountering as you encounter them. And that context that it maintains helps to allow you to really explore something and dig into areas of a subject in greater detail that you wouldn't be able to do with just a basic sort of web search without having to do a lot of extra work on your own, right? Going back, starting a new search, right, with some extra context, trying to go find new file locations, etc. It can bring all this stuff together. So very, very helpful in digging into subject matters. And because of that context history, you can also better explore or maybe tackle areas of ambiguity for yourself. So as an example, I know of Photoshop, I know of Illustrator. I know they both do images, but what's the difference, right? Photoshop and Illustrator. Now notice, I don't reference Adobe, right? I don't reference anything in particular, but it can tell based on the context of the question. It knows what I'm asking about, in part because I'm specifying Photoshop and Illustrator together. So it's pretty smart. So it can help to explain nuances that you've struggled with and allow you to work through it. So one thing that I had it talk through for me was helping to better understand how to think about Docker and containers and Kubernetes, which in my mind, had kind of always been this somewhat similar subject that kind of melded together. But there's a lot of extra clarity I was able to get by having an ongoing conversation. Those things are definitely very, very helpful. So it's something that I think at a minimum can be a great tool in your tool belt. Now, if you can't just use it and just take what it has verbatim. One, it produces errors. I went through on a scripting process and it gave me bad advice at times. And so I would follow up with, hey, that doesn't seem like the right answer. And it would say, okay, I can do it this way. So you have to validate, you have to review what it's giving you. You cannot just take things verbatim and say, great, I put in a prompt, it gave me output, and now I can run. Two, it can be repetitive in tone and the way that it speaks to things. So that's where asking it to change the language style can be beneficial. But if you tell it to be funny, that style of humor is going to be kind of the same for what you produce. So there are certainly limitations in terms of how it can output information. So it's important to keep those things in mind. So again, great tool, but it's not a replacement for doing stuff on your own. It can be generic, but it can be a significant accelerator for you. I've found it to be an incredibly helpful research tool. I'm a super curious person, and I really like just being able to dig into thorny or complex subjects. Now, these are technical matters. I'm not talking about philosophy or anything else. I haven't delved into any of that type of stuff. But for technical issues or just personal areas of curiosity, it's so much faster for me to have a quick dialogue with it and dig into details that is just far more enriching for me than what I would get through traditional web browsing. So I am going to go show just very quickly, because this was sort of the starting point for me of ChatGPT kind of blowing my mind. And for some reason I cannot see the scroll bar. Oh, here it is. So this is, I'm not going to go through any of this in detail. If I could just, okay, it's not letting me do that. Okay. I started with a particular question, which was I was trying to better understand how to think about awk, which is commonly used in bash scripts, and it's a way of text interaction. And it gave me this. I ended up having a incredibly long, ongoing discussion with ChatGPT as I was working through a task that I was struggling with. Well, not struggling with, but I was something I knew I needed to do, and it helped me get to a resolution I would have gotten to on my own, but in a much faster process. And it was me creating some scripting capabilities, right, for a client that I needed for some monitoring and remediation capabilities. Because of that context retention, I had this ongoing discussion. I troubleshot issues. It gave me wrong information at times, but it significantly accelerated my process. It helped me, confirm some of the testing mechanisms I would want to go through, and ultimately helped me to generate, a script that met my requirements for a particular task in a way that was very, very beneficial for me. You can see just how long this conversation is, how much actual code is being generated. I would spit code back out to it as I was having, discussions and say, well, I've changed your code, review this. And it was an ongoing discussion, and it was something that actually was really beneficial. So that's just one example. I wanted to show just how long that discussion, that dialogue was. This was, I was leaving, coming back over the course of a day, but it was an ongoing dialogue around a lot of these different things. It was helpful because I could also ask questions about what it would provide so that it would help round out my understanding of some of the syntax and issues. That's what I wanted to cover today. Just wanted to give everyone, wanted to give folks who are curious a little bit of insight into how to think about some of these tools. Now, I haven't covered Dall-E, right, which is image generation, though I have explored that a little bit, and maybe I'll do a video on that. Kind of stupid, kind of amazing, kind of terrifying all in one go just as well. And then I'll also have some content later on about Microsoft's Copilot that they've recently announced, because that's kind of taking some of this content, putting it into a business context, and also allowing it to work with your company information. Not in a way that makes that visible for everyone else, but that was a pretty interesting kind of preview that Microsoft recently did, and I'll talk through that as well. If you have questions about some of these AI tools, you're interested, you have some thoughts around them, put them into the comments section. I'm always looking to hear what folks think. If you like this, if you want to hear more about it, leave me a note about what would be beneficial to discuss next. And subscribe. I'm working to kind of build this channel out. I hope you enjoy some of the content. And with that, I think I'm going to sign off for the day. But yeah, more to come. And if you haven't taken a look at some of these tools, go do some exploring. That can't hurt. And it is really interesting to see what they can do. But you got to take everything they say with a little bit of a grain of salt or a jar. Thanks, everyone.